The NBA playoffs are here, and I'm getting my bets in on FanDuel. Talk to me, Chuck GPT. What do you know?
All sorts of interesting stuff, even Charles Barkley's greatest fear.
Hey, nobody needs to know that.
New customers bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
21 plus and present in Ohio. Must be first online real money wager. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus vest that expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Springfest and Ego Days are here at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select Ego 56-volt battery with purchase of a Select trimmer, blower, or mower kit. Plus, shop today for new and exclusive items you need for your lawn. So get ready for spring with the latest in innovation from Ego, the #1 rated brand in cordless outdoor power. Only at Lowe's. We help, you save. Offer valid through 4/2. Selection varies by location while supplies last.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 528, Operation Northern Lights. Backing up a bit to cover Army Group North's ongoing attempt to take Leningrad and thus free up tens of thousands of troops needed elsewhere on the Eastern Front, it may be remembered that after Crimea fell and General Erich von Manstein and his 11th Army expected to go help take Rostov-on-Don, Hitler decided the successful general would instead head north. Leningrad was being stubborn, as it had been holding out since September of 1941. It was time for that stubbornness to be punished. By September of 1941, Army Group North, led by Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb, had cut through the Baltic states relatively rapidly. But things slowed down the closer he and his got to the great city named after Lenin. Again, by September, the Germans had linked up with the Finns, and soon the last Soviet rail line was cut. And then the last road. A small land corridor from the city's eastern edge to Lake Ladoga was all that remained. As the city was as good as captured, Hitler stressed, again, there would be no urban fighting. It would cost too many lives. Leningrad was to be starved into submission. Thus, the siege of Leningrad began in earnest. But the 3 million residents of the city had been busy preparing defenses. Again, not that the Germans were trying to enter, yet other forces of Army Group North found that they were unable to push much further east to the southeast of Leningrad. It was frustrating, but Hitler stuck to his word. There was no attempt to enter the city. But time changes things. By the summer of the following year, 1942, with the drive on Moscow not only stalled, but pushed back to Rzhev, Hitler needed something to give. Army Group South was doing well, and Crimea was completely occupied by July 4th, but there was still much fighting to do in the area, as he now wanted the Caucasus oil at Baku under German control. But that would take a while, and with the bloodletting around Rzhev of Army Group Center, Berlin needed the men of Army Group North freed up, so Leningrad needed to fall now. Hence, General Erich von Manstein was told to head north and take a part of the 11th Army with him. He had cracked the nut that had been Sevastopol. He was expected to do the same at Leningrad. But even before Crimea fell, the area to the southeast of Leningrad had become its own titanic struggle. With German offenses and Russian counteroffensives, the lines shifted with each battle. But what did not change was the ownership of the great city and the land corridor just 16 kilometers wide between the city and Lake Ladoga, called the Schlissenburg-Signavio Corridor. This constantly threatened and at times closed land bridge of marshy, forested, mosquito-infested terrain area was the only communication line still connecting Leningrad with Moscow. As things stood when von Manstein was en route, the Germans controlled the high ground to the south of the Soviets' corridor, but it would be this very corridor that would be the Germans' next target. Back in January of 1942, Hitler, frustrated with von Lieb's lack of success, replaced him with Field Marshal George von Kuchler, and Kuchler was a fighter. It was he and his men that had captured Danzig during the invasion of Poland, and then his troops had been sent east to meet up with the invading Soviets coming from the east. Further, Kuchler would not let his troops kill Jewish or Polish civilians, as he told the Gauleiter of East Prussia, "The German army is not a supplier for a killer gang," which was the wrong thing to say in Hitler's Germany. Kuchler was removed from his post. But he was too good a commander to be left on the sidelines for long. He would command troops once again in the Netherlands. His 18th Army defeated Dutch troops at Rotterdam and The Hague. His men then moved on and occupied Antwerp in Belgium. As Germany secretly geared up for Barbarossa, Kuchler seems to have had a change of heart in regards to the killing of civilians. He told his divisional commanders just before invading Soviet Russia, "If Germany wishes to live in peace for generations, safe from a threatening danger in the East, this cannot be the case of pushing Russia back a little or even hundreds of kilometers, but the aim must be to annihilate European Russia."
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Back to January 1942, now in command of Army Group North, he found himself having to fight off the latest Soviet attack, this one by the Soviet Second Shock Army near Lublin, about 40 miles or 64 kilometers due south of Lake Ladoga. Fortunately for Kuchler, this was launched at a time when Moscow was reorganizing itself, coupled with Stalin still making hasty decisions. Hence, the Second Shock Army went in, having no tanks for support, and they lacked enough artillery to support their infantry charges while also trying to counter German artillery. The Second Shock Army quickly became the victim of Kuchler's Operation Wild Beast. Having tanks, artillery, and mechanized infantry, the Germans were able to quickly cut off and surround the attackers. As for any deeper penetration to the southeast of Leningrad by the Soviets, the Germans' offensive capabilities served as their best defense. Once the Soviet army was cut off, its thoughts turned to escaping, which wasn't going to happen. Kuchler had the Second Shock Army closed in on. Of its 327,000-man force, 308,000 of them were either killed, wounded, or captured. Again, this was Stalin that thought numbers were everything. He was yet to learn of experience and how diverse units working together maximized punching power. However, to Marshal Zhukov, it was clear that the Volkhov and Leningrad fronts still lacked armored vehicles, adequate ammunition for artillery, reserves, and fuel to successfully launch such an operation. And not caring about your men is one thing, but stupidly wasting them and having to start all over, that's something else. By June of 1942, the Battle of Lublin was over. And yes, it was a German victory, but it still took the initiative away from the Germans to have to react to it. As this fighting and victory burned up the first few months of 1942, Hitler was getting more agitated by Leningrad's continued existence. And needing to do something before he was disgraced and replaced, Kuchler started planning Operation Nordich, Northern Light. And the fighting would be done by the men Manstein was bringing with him. Arriving on August 27, 1942, Manstein liked the idea of Operation Northern Light. To smash into Leningrad was impossible, and again, against Hitler's dictum. But to cut off its last lifeline, that would be the beginning of its end, and the details had already been worked on during Manstein's journey. Using the part of the 11th Army that he brought with him, along with the SS Polizei Division, the 170th Infantry Division, and the heavy siege artillery coming from Crimea, plus the air support of Luftflotte 1, Manstein would break the lines of the Soviet 55th and 8th Armies, which held open the corridor, and then he would roll up each end. Driving further north still, he would then link up with the Finns, truly isolating Leningrad. Then the city would be weakened enough, through starvation, to enter the city proper without fighting. And Hitler had already made it clear Leningrad was to no longer exist. The attack that saw the destruction of most of the Second Shock Army was not the first Soviet thrust to try to relieve Leningrad. And since that and this attempt failed, there would be another. So as the Germans were putting together Northern Light, Moscow was busy putting together its next attack. But it was the Germans who held the high ground, literally, not morally. Just south of Lake Ladoga, the land is covered in forests and wetlands. Its trees make observation of activity there almost impossible. But just south of this is the Sinyavino Heights, named after a town hard upon. The height is about 150 meters high, and the Germans held it with interlocking trenches, artillery, and mortar fire. So they could harass enemy supply convoys trailing along the Road of Life, as the Soviets call the corridor, to the heights northwest that kept Leningrad in the fight, when they could see them. Again, the trees. But Hitler had decided that 1942 was all about two things: capturing Leningrad and driving into the Caucasus. This would free up troops to help in other areas along the Eastern Front. And yet, Berlin wasn't the only one making plans. Still, Kugler had been in touch with Hitler since early 1942, putting together an attack that would give them Leningrad. And that plan took shape, and at least 12 divisions would be a part of this. Whereas the Soviet plan to attack, again, this time, was much better prepared. Starting to learn that he needed more than numbers, the Second Shock Army was rebuilt and given more artillery, ammunition, and this time, tanks. Further, as the Volkhov front on Lake Ladoga's southeast corner was stronger than the Leningrad front itself to the west of the lake, Volkhov soldiers would carry out the attack, while the Leningrad troops would only demonstrate to tie down enemy forces closest to it. But a mental map will explain this better. At the bottom left corner of Lake Ladoga is the Neva River. The Leningrad front started on its western side. The Volkhov front started about 10 miles or 16 kilometers to the river's east, and in between these was the German 26th Army Corps, keeping the two Soviet fronts apart. The town in the height of Sinyavino is just below the lake's shoreline. Hence, the Volkhov front would push in to the west, while the Leningrad front opposite them would demonstrate along the Neva River, tying down forces there. The Volkhov front's 8th Army would go in first, then the 4th Guards Rifle Corps, and then the reformed Second Shock Army. Again, it's worth stressing that Stalin was learning, well, if not patience, then at least professionalism. Each of the attacking forces just mentioned, called echelons to him, were given a tank battalion, additional artillery regiments, and at least one battery of Katyusha rocket launchers. Most men now carried some machine guns, and engineering units was to be with each battery to keep them mobile. Meanwhile, General Manstein arrived on the scene on August 27th. But soldiers of the Leningrad front had started capturing bridges across the Neva River starting on August 19th to better prepare to link up with their comrades coming from the east. However, there had been so much fighting in the area, the Germans did not realize this action's larger significance. What helped was the Volkhov front was still quiet. Besides, Operation Northern Lights was set to begin on September 14th, which is where Kugler's attention currently was. Then came August 27th. The forested terrain in between the two Soviet fronts allowed the Soviet 8th Army, coming from the east, to catch the Germans opposite them unawares. The first few lines of defense of the 223rd Infantry were breached. The Soviets moved on, advancing about 3 kilometers or 1.9 miles that day. Then, per Soviet doctrine, the penetration was to be widened instead of deepened, which was a mistake. Preparing for their own attack, Northern Light, German command redeployed the 5th Mountain and the 28th Light Infantry Divisions from their jump-off points to counter this enemy penetration. The fighting quickly became bogged down. The Soviet expansion slowed, but it did not stop. Not giving up, 2 days later, the Soviets sent in their second echelon, the 4th Guards Rifle Corps, to add to their now 7 kilometers or 4-mile deep penetration. Progress, to be sure, by the Russians, but this only caused the Germans to commit additional troops, these being the 12th Panzer and a part of the 96th Infantry Division. What would help turn the tide was air dominance, and though the Soviets had a 2-to-1 advantage, the Germans still controlled the skies overhead. By the opening of September, at least 42 Soviet aircraft had been shot down, but it was about to get much worse for the Russians. Not only was their air force not attacking German ground troops, not only were Soviet ground troops being attacked by German air power, but they soon found that the shells for their battalion guns were the wrong ones, and they were quickly running out of hand grenades, with no more coming up to the front.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
To be sure, the Volkhov Front was not attempting to advance along the entire front. Their thrust only came from their left flank, near the bottom of this local theater, though troops to their north did demonstrate, again to keep enemy units opposite them tied down. Still, to the immediate west of the Soviets' deepest penetration, the Leningrad Front, with its limited resources, did manage to push in a bit past the Neva River in support. It was all they could do. And knowing what was waiting for them if they did not give their all, besides wanting to help those trapped 3 million people in Leningrad, the Soviets continued to advance, but they suffered heavily as they did. By September 5th, the Volkhov troops had pushed in some 9 kilometers or 5.5 miles, now only 6 kilometers or almost 4 miles shy of the Neva River. As for taking the heights themselves, the Germans were too well entrenched for that to happen. Still, German positions to either side of the height were taken, but that was as far as they were going to go. German reinforcements had arrived and were adding their might to the defense. Seeing this, Moscow sent in its 3rd echelon, the rebuilt Second Shock Army. Yet German units quickly and continuously attacked their flanks, causing them to pause because they might be surrounded, and everyone knew what would happen then. But not giving up on September 7th, 2 weary divisions were pulled from the Soviet 8th Army and replaced, and another tank brigade was thrown in for good measure. However, the fighting stagnated. The lines barely moved. From September 10th to the 19th, nothing really changed. But as both sides waited for reinforcements in sufficient strength and/or for air units to substantially weaken the other, but that wasn't going to happen. Of course, by now, Manstein was in command of this, and having finally stopped the Soviet advance, his next goal was to cut off the Soviets' penetration, surround it, and annihilate it. He had already tried this once on September 10th, but that came to nothing, besides his own heavy casualties. So while the Soviets waited for reinforcements, Manstein built up his forces. He decided it was best to hit the base of the Soviet salient from both sides, from the north and south. And the Germans won the race of reinforcements. On September 21st, Manstein's counterattack got underway. The 121st Infantry Division attacked the salient space from the north. The 24th, 132nd, and 170th Infantry Divisions attacked from the south, while the 3rd Mountain and 28th Light Infantry Divisions hit the bulge from the west to make sure there would be no further Soviet gains in that direction. Ironically, the Germans, in trying to advance in order to attack, had to deal with the challenging terrain, i.e. the marshy wetlands, as the Soviets had done months earlier during their numerous counterattacks. Still, this was overcome, and after 5 days of fighting the enemy and the terrain, the two German pincers met near a town called Gaitletovo. Now trapped was the 6th Guards Rifle Corps and 2nd Shock Army of about 45,000 men. Of course, nearby Soviet forces outside the entrapment slammed themselves against the German ring, as did those inside, trying to escape. But both failed. And with that done, as had happened so many times before, the trapped Soviet men were shelled and hit with air attacks over and over. As these men were dying by the thousands, the Leningrad front's expansion was checked by the 28th Light Infantry and 12th Panzer Divisions. By October 15th, it was over. Those Soviet forces trapped were either dead or captured. All that Soviet Russia had to show for this, besides the almost 6,000 dead Germans, was a small bridgehead held by the Leningrad front at Moskovskaya, due west of the 8th Army's deepest penetration. A Soviet failure, yes, but also a German one. As the Russians had launched their attack first, not only was Operation Northern Light negated, the German losses of men and equipment meant that it could now not be launched, whereas the Soviets would be back with their next attack, Operation Iskra, in January of 1943, so only 2.5 months away. So, zooming out a bit, this local German victory hurt them overall on the Eastern Front. First, the OKH ordered for Army Group North to go over to the defensive for the winter, and what was left of the 11th Army and some other units would leave Army Group North to go help with a major offensive taking place at Stalingrad. And Leningrad was still there, defiant, holding down tens of thousands of German and Finnish troops. As many would say after the war, the Wehrmacht might be a mighty elephant, but the Russians were turning out to be a million ants biting the large beast, wearing it down. Postscript. The fighting around Sinyavino would stabilize, again, until January of 43. But this would not be Manstein's headache. No, he had another one waiting for him. Soon, Manstein would be recalled to the south, for General Paulus's 6th Army was suffering, and if truth be told, needing a rescue. As for the Northern Lights, those never rose over Leningrad. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I just want to, again, thank everybody for responding to my Let's Go With plea. I appreciate it very much. Let's see the latest members. Duncan Gangley from Netherlands, Australia. Thank you, Duncan. Thomas Nielsen from Sweden. And this next one, I'm not sure, so I'm just going to say Suzanne Ruiz Rodriguez, or someone in her office. So thank you very much for the support. As far as donations, let's see here. Tom Legg, thank you very much. Ronald Wakefield, and thanks for the extra $1 because it's Monday. Much appreciated. Dominic Charles, thank you very much. Patrick Young, thank you, sir. John Haskell, and I think he's a member. Thank you, John. Mike at Cloud Level Media, thank you very much. I think I mentioned this name, but I'm going to be safe. Stephen, is that Birnbaum? God, I really put the emphasis on that. Sorry, Stephen. Anyways, and literally right before I hit record, I got another donation from a Kyle Donico. Anyway, Kyle, thank you very much. So I really do appreciate it. Taking some pressure off. I got to be honest, taking a little bit of pressure off, at least this month. So thank you very much. So I wanted to, one, do something other than what was going on in the South. Two, so not only did we kind of cover Army Group North because, it's a siege, right? But we did show a serious attempt in how, again, the Soviets were able to ruin a German plan, which then affects other German plans in the south. So, obviously it's all connected. And Rzhev, they're just going back and forth. So now we're going to go back to Army Group Dawn, which is not long to live, and is going to be called something else. And then we'll just watch them retreat, which then sets up the tank battle at Kursk. Thank you for everybody's support. Thank you for listening. Tell a friend. I really appreciate it. And as always, take care, everyone.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly, out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.